Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. Today we'll be talking about lesson 24 of our study, which covers the book of Genesis, chapters 40 and 41. The important point to this story is, as we have already seen, Joseph can interpret dreams. And the interpretation of dreams comes from God. As he states anytime that he's talking about interpreting dreams. We left him where we left off. He was already basically running the prison. So then by luck or, blessing of God, a couple of Pharaoh's servants find their way in the prison for having displeased Pharaoh. They have these dreams that they can't possibly figure out what they mean, and Joseph is serving them because he's running the prison. And he helpfully offers to interpret their dreams for them. Then through an outlandish series of events, eventually one of them is back in the service of Pharaoh, who is also having dreams he can't understand and nobody's been able to help with, and finally says, I might know a guy. Come to think of it, I kind of promised him I would help him out when I got established again. So through kind of a crazy series of events, eventually Pharaoh is having also dreams that he and no one else can understand. And Pharaoh's butler, who had previously been in prison, with Joseph, and one of those guys who had an interpreted dream says, "Oh, I know a guy. Come to think of it, I kind of promised him I would help him out when I got back on my feet 3 years ago. Whoops. But now that I need something, Pharaoh, I know a guy." Great job, butler. Who's about to report to Joseph. Joseph comes, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and makes a recommendation. And this is where we see not only is Joseph able to interpret dreams, but he also is clever and capable, right? He not only says, this is the dream and what's going to happen, but he's able to say, and this is what you should do about it. And you really ought to find somebody who can handle that. And Pharaoh, also not being stupid, says, I think I found just that guy. I think he's right here telling me what we should do. You're second in charge of Egypt now. Please do what you have in mind and enjoy being second in charge of Egypt. So Joseph went from arriving in Egypt as a slave to being second only to Pharaoh in Egypt in not that many years. He's 30 years old when he's put second in command of Egypt. So at this point, he's having a good time in Egypt, and things are going very well. And again, his talents are much more useful than tending sheep in Canaan. So this is a good series of development, and it shows all along the way he's had these rough patches and these challenges, but God has always had his back and made every bad thing that happens to him turn into a better situation than the one he was in before. Oh, you're at home and your brothers don't like you very much and you're tending sheep all day. Oh, you get sold into slavery. Now you're the head of a household for a guy who's very well off. He falsely decides he has a problem with you. Now you're running a prison, not a step up, but okay place to spend a few years, I guess. And that eventually leads to a conversation with Pharaoh where now, this is Joseph's life, right? He goes along and God points him in the next direction and gives him the means and the capacity to always come out in a very advantageous way. And that is kind of our point here, is one, it's important to know there's going to be a famine. It's important to know Egypt has that in hand because of what Joseph's doing. And it's really important to see how that blessing is working and how Joseph is thriving while being devoted to God in this foreign land. So big deal in terms of the things that happen, and we'll go through it. And it's an interesting and even a fun story. And if you've seen the musical, there are a lot of good lyrics along with it as well. Even if it's not a perfectly apt description of the events, it's pretty funny. But we'll go through it. But those are the important big takeaways. As Joseph is managing the prison that he is a prisoner in, he has, it turns out, two of Pharaoh's servants at the same time are put into this prison, a baker and a butler. And it so happens that Joseph is serving them because he's in charge, and that's what he's doing. And that some night they both have very distressing dreams and don't know what to do about them. And they make that complaint to Joseph, who says, well, maybe I can help. I think the interpretation of dreams, that belongs to God, right? God and I are close, so tell me your dreams, what can it hurt? Seems like I might be able to help. So first is the butler. His dream is encouraging, right? He is, again, serving ripe, good wine to Pharaoh, and it's from 3 grapes, which Joseph says, hey, that means in 3 days you'll be back in your old job. But when that happens, because that's totally, absolutely, definitely going to happen, and you're established in your old office again, why don't you do me the favor of mentioning me to Pharaoh? Because I'm here unjustly, and I was never meant to be a slave here, stolen out of my homeland. I'm helping you out now. Maybe you can help me out later when you're definitely getting released, which is what your dream means. So, good start to the interpretation of dreams. Good news for the butler. The baker also has a dream about doing his job that involves 3 things. In this case, cake baskets rather than vines and bunches of grapes. And he's also going to serve them to Pharaoh. So similar dream has to have a similar outcome, right? Except it has birds pecking away at and eating the bread. And to Joseph, that means you're going to be dead in 3 days. Pharaoh is not going to recant and is not pleased, and you're done for, which also is what's going to happen. Then we see confirmation that Joseph's interpretation of the dreams is exactly what happens, and also that the butler doesn't come through for Joseph. You can see how initially, right, he might be really elated to not be dead and to be restored to his position, and might be, might have his judgment clouded. But at some point, you would expect that he would remember Joseph and return the favor, and he does not. So 2 years later, Pharaoh has a couple of similar but different related dreams. One involving 14 cows and one involving 14 years of corn, 7 good ones, 7 bleak ones after that. He is distressed by these dreams. Their similar nature makes him think there's something to this. He asks all of his magicians and wise men. No one can interpret the dreams. And it's a cause of some distress. And then that is when Pharaoh's butler says, oh, I know a guy. It's that guy I was supposed to do a favor for. And he interpreted dreams. And now at least he says to Pharaoh, I met a guy in prison who interpreted dreams accurately. I and your former chief baker had dreams, and he told us exactly what was going to happen before it happened, and he was right. So I think I know a guy who can interpret your dreams. Why does this come about, by the way? God doesn't need to send these dreams. There's no evidence that it's really commonplace for that to happen to Pharaoh, right? This is in service of Joseph, right? God is doing all of this to put Joseph in the position that he's getting to. God is helping Joseph. And laid that framework way back in the dungeon, right? Even if it takes years to come to fruition, God had all of this in hand, all of this in mind, and put the pieces in place along the way. All Joseph had to do is be a good guy and take advantage of the opportunities as they came along and stay in close relationship with God. Things were taken care of long before Joseph knew they were taken care of. Here Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. His first point, these aren't two dreams, this is one dream. The doubling of it means it's absolutely certain and going to happen soon. What it means is 7 good cows or ears of corn means 7 years of great prosperity, and the 7 bad ones after that mean 7 years of famine. Note that the 7s mean repeating cycles of years and not a complete and a perfect and a whole and well-rounded number. Again, 7 means that when you run into it. It's normal and natural that if you have a first period of 7 years, you're going to have another one, like happens here. It's all over the place. But for whatever reason, the idea has gotten out that that's not what 7 is, but that's what 7 is, as we see again here. Anyway, 7 prosperous years, 7 years of famine coming very soon. And this is where things get interesting. And we start to see Joseph's talent, right? A model employee doesn't just come to you and say, here's a problem. Good employees and people who tend to advance up the ladder come and say, here's a problem, and here's a proposed solution to that problem. And this is where Joseph goes from, this is what God has told you, Pharaoh, is going to happen, into, and I know exactly what you should do about it, which is you need to go throughout the land, you need to take a portion of this prosperity, you need to store it during these plentiful years, and then you need to be able to distribute it during the famine to get the people through it. And you need to be able to manage all of the logistics throughout the kingdom of Egypt to do both of those. So you really need a competent person, a man discreet and wise, to be over all of this function to make sure that things go well. So you need somebody who can figure out that you need to do these things that I figured out you need to do. And this is where things get interesting. And we start to see Joseph's talent, right? A model employee doesn't just come to you and say, here's a problem. Good employees and people who tend to advance up the ladder come and say, here's a problem, and here's a proposed solution to that problem. And this is where Joseph goes from, this is what God has told you, Pharaoh, is going to happen, into, and I know exactly what you should do about it, which is you need to go throughout the land, you need to take a portion of this prosperity, you need to store it during these plentiful years, and then you need to be able to distribute it during the famine to get the people through it. And you need to be able to manage all of the logistics throughout the kingdom of Egypt to do both of those. So you really need a competent person, a man discreet and wise, to be over all of this function to make sure that things go well. So you need somebody who can figure out that you need to do these things that I figured out you need to do. Then Pharaoh consults with his advisors and says, do you guys know where we can find somebody like that? Which seems like a very leading question, and especially when it's somebody in whom is the Spirit of God, like this guy. And then he says, I know where we can find somebody like that, this guy right here. And then Joseph gets put second in command of Egypt. Pharaoh gives him his signet ring and basically tells everybody that his word is law. Short only of he's not on the throne and he can't overrule, obviously, Pharaoh. But beyond that, absolute control of the kingdom of Egypt. He's given all the kinds of things you would expect to come with that, and he's also given in marriage, which is presumably also a very powerful marriage, into the priesthood. So things are going very well for Joseph now in Egypt. He's got a lot of work to do, but his position has definitely greatly improved as well. Then the period of abundance comes, and Joseph gets to work executing the plan that he had in mind. We know there's going to be a famine, but for now we are in a time of plenty. It is also worth noting that in Egypt, Joseph has two children, Ephraim and Manasseh, or Manasseh and Ephraim in the order that they're placed here. They matter, and that's the birth order. Then, after our 7 years of plenty and Joseph having two children, the predicted famine happens. And it doesn't just happen in Egypt, it happens in all the lands, which positions Egypt very well because Egypt was the only one who had that foreknowledge and somebody acting on it to store a lot of food. So people from everywhere in famine all around are eager to come to Egypt to try to find something to eat. So this puts Egypt in a very advantageous and powerful position because of Joseph. Pharaoh has to be very happy with this arrangement, right? Things are going very well in Egypt, but as you can imagine, not well everywhere else. This has been an overview of Lesson 24 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.